Hello, anyone. Welcome to the Jeff Bushman Experience. Today is April the 12th, 2015. Welcome to the show. If you saw our last show, you pretty much know what it's about. If you didn't, you don't. Unless you listened to us previously at blogtalkradio.com or goingbeyondradio.com, going a little further back. And going even further back on blogtalkradio.com. Anyway, hello, I'm Jeff Bushman, which is a really good coincidence considering the name of the show. Our video setup today is better than it was last week, not as good as it will be. We have done some experimenting, and you will perhaps notice that the lighting is better. The sound quality is, I think, better, but that's not as a result of technical devices. That's as a result of the fact that my voice is not tired today as it was last week. Okay, it's a little tired today, but it's not nearly as bad. In the coming weeks, we will be doing some experimentation with sound and video, and specifically, I believe we're going to be shooting this on a camera that will shoot an HD video, the effect of which obviously will be you won't see all of the video transitions, if you will. Every time I move, watch this, it takes a while for the image to catch up. So what's happening is, because this is not shot in HD, you're seeing the motion of my face, assuming that's what moves. In each place it stops, and you see motion, of course, because you're not seeing absolute full stops, but you're seeing some of them. So that's what's going on there. We also today tested Skype for the purpose of having conversations during the taping, pardon me, of the program. And the good news is it works. The bad news is I can't do video on Skype and do a YouTube video, but we can at least have the audio while you are stuck with looking at my face. So that's what we have planned, and we're going to be adding conversations to the program in the coming weeks. The reason we switched from Blog Talk Radio, besides the fact they don't have video, is not because I actually was anxious to do video, but the length of the show allowed at Blog Talk without paying an arm and a leg is 30 minutes. We did 49 minutes last week. We'll probably do something like that today. Let me tell you what we're going to cover in today's program. First, we're going to talk about a law that was passed and signed into law here in the state of Arizona, pardon me, by our relatively new governor, Doug Ducey. Forgive me, I'm going to take a drink. Fortunately, it's non-alcoholic. Bear with me. Isn't live taping great? Okay. And the law requires doctors to lie to their patients. We'll talk about that in a minute. We're also going to do This Week in History, and following that, we're going to talk about the extremely intelligent and wise idea of placing religious symbols on your business cards and signs. Okay, we'll talk about that. Stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you'd like to have at us in some other ways, let me tell you how you can do that. You can email us at tjbradio@gmail.com. That's T, J, did that come out right? Yeah, I think it's like that. Well, regardless. Yeah, there it is, J. That's not coming out right at all. Okay, tjbradio@gmail.com. If, by the way, you would like to talk on a future show, we can do that with Skype. And when you email me, if that's something you're interested in, give me your Skype address, and we'll see what we can do to hook up. And first, I'll probably email you to verify that. But that's something we can now implement. I'm so excited about the technology. Anyway, you can drop us a line that way. And you can let us know what you think about anything we say. You can also of course, let us know if you'd be interested in talking to us on air, that is, while we're shooting the video through Skype. Let's see, the other thing I wanted to tell you, please, if I may, is that you can also access some of our writing through the site bushmanbooks.blogspot.com. Next week we'll have a visual for that, bushmanbooks.blogspot.com. Speaking of visuals, we have one for that last segment of the program, which I'll show you at that time. But the reason I am mentioning visuals, besides the obvious fact that video is a visual medium, is that a friend of mine had told me there were two issues that he had with the program we did last time. He didn't criticize the things that I thought were appropriate, but he did say, one, as long as you're doing something visual, you ought to do something that is visual in nature, and I agree. The other thing he said that I'm not so sure I agree with is that there ought to be a live broadcast, not just the video. What we discovered in our prior internet-based radio programs is that almost nobody listens live or watches live, I suppose. But everybody, or many people, will listen to or watch a podcast or a video after that because, of course, it's more convenient for them. Unlike regular TV, and even then that's not true anymore, but because we have DVRs. But with regular TVs, some people still say, okay, it's 9 o'clock on a Thursday, I've got a program to watch. But in internet-based radio, at least, that never happens. They know it's going to be recorded. They know it's going to be available as a podcast. So that's what they do. Okay, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. First, we recently had a law passed in Arizona, and the reason I'm mentioning it is because it's not just parochial and limited to this rather backward state. Rather, it was a statute that was written as a model statute and passed around to various conservative or Republican state legislatures so that they could pass similar laws. The law has to do with the so-called medical abortion, and this is where the woman who believes she is pregnant or is in fact pregnant takes one pill, and then I believe it's the next day takes a second one. I think this is the RU-247 or something like that, but if it's not, you get the idea. It's a 2-pill regimen. Take one pill day 1 and another pill day 2, and an abortion is manifested. There are very few people, very few doctors, and there's one in particular down in San Diego who believes that by taking a drug after the first pill is given and before the second one is given, you can reverse the effects of the abortion. The reality is there's been no science on this, no study, but he says he's done it and he managed to save the pregnancy. Now, there's no evidence at all about what this does in terms of how what is then a fetus or an embryo, more correctly, is going to turn out. And there is no telling what effect it's going to have on the mother's health, short-term or long-term. That's secondary, however. I mean, that's obviously of vital importance, but that's secondary to the issue that's come up with this legislation. Because since there is no science on it, why would you have a doctor tell a patient that this is possible? Well, the Arizona legislature in their infinite wisdom and the governor in his have passed into law a law that says that doctors must tell their women patients who want the medical abortion, the 2-pill regimen, that they can, if they choose to do so, reverse it after the first pill is taken. It's not true. It's not true. Or at least it's not proven to be true. But they are told that. They are going to be told that as soon as this law goes into effect. Because the legislature has deemed itself more knowledgeable than doctors about medical procedures. And they're going to have their doctors lie to their patients. Okay, that's the Arizona law. And by the way, the Arizona legislature prides itself, or Arizona prides itself, on having a legislature that is nominally part-time. They meet all day when they meet, but they meet for only several months a year, normally. Sometimes it ends up the legislature extends its session enough that they're effectively full-time legislators, but they try, and in fact they've been doing that lately. They're ending their session early so they can go back and do their various businesses. And in Arizona, unlike California and some other states, they do not have professional full-time legislators. That's part of the reason for this. The other thing is that our governor, prior to becoming governor of the state of Arizona, held no public office. His prior experience was in creating and running, for a time, he's since sold it, Cold Stone Creamery. So basically the way it works is that if you're prepared to, what's the word, hack I don't know, but in any event, peddle ice cream. If you're all set to peddle ice cream or some other product, who knows? Someday you too could be governor in some states. Now, people may point out that there are certain other governors who have never held another elective office prior to their being governor, and one good example is Howard Dean of Vermont, who sort of tried to run for president one year. And Ronald Reagan, who before he was governor of California had never held a public elective office. And he was later elected president, but we all know how that worked out. Okay, we are now, pardon my reach and my momentary going off camera. Is it obvious we're not professional at this yet? Okay. We're going to talk about this week in history. We are broadcasting is the wrong word. We are recording on April the 12th, as mentioned earlier, 2015. This is the anniversary of a date on which a man became president who had never been elected or voted for that office. He became president on April 12th. Do you know who it was and what year it was? And while we're at it, how he became president, since he had not been voted for. April 12th. We'll come back to that, obviously. In the meantime, 2 days ago was April 10th, and on that date, in 1944, April 12th, 1944, 2 prisoners escaped from the Auschwitz concentration camp. Their names were Rudolf Verba and Alfred Wetzler. They escaped from the death camp, and they produced a detailed report which told all about the process for killing people that was used at Auschwitz. And they managed to get this report to Western intelligence, the United States and Great Britain. And they were requesting that the Allies bomb Auschwitz and other concentration camps. Now, by the way, that went on throughout the war. There were people who wanted the Allies to bomb the concentration camps. And one of the questions that comes up is, why would anybody want the Allies to bomb the concentration camps in light of the fact that if they did that, hundreds at least, perhaps thousands of Jews, Gypsies, Poles, and others who were in the concentration camps would be killed? Well, the answer is that yes, they would be killed, but guess what? They were going to be killed anyway. And what you would do by bombing the concentration camps is you would eliminate the ability of the Nazis to kill more people. Obviously, those bombings never happened. The other things that were urged upon the Allies that they never did was to bomb the railroad tracks for the trains that took people to the concentration camps, and they didn't do that either. Okay. In 1955, on April 10th, Jonas Salk successfully tested the polio vaccine. Prior to that, there was no polio vaccine. It's hard to believe. Pardon me. As a matter of fact, I remember being a child in elementary school being given the shot. The Salk vaccine was an injection. It took until several years later for the Sabin vaccine to come out, which was given on a sugar cube. But at that time, and actually in 1955, it didn't happen. It didn't happen until at least, I think, 56. But at that, and I was in kindergarten in that year, when they gave the vaccine, it was normally given at a doctor's office or through a public health facility, and it was an injection. And if memory serves, and I could be wrong on this because it is a bloody long time ago, you had to have 3 shots. There was a regimen of 3 shots, not all the same day. You went in for one, and then you went in for another, and obviously, if I'm right, you went in for a third. With the Salk vaccine, there were 2 advantages. One is, of course, it wasn't a shot. The second advantage to it was that it was, and it was on a sugar cube, you only had to take 1. So that was it. That's my memory. That was Sabin. That was several years later. Okay. Also on April 10th, in 1827, there was born a man who would become an American Civil War general and the author of a famous novel. A little unusual. The novel was Ben-Hur, and you may have seen the movie that was made from that. Yeah, but that was actually written by an American general, Civil War general. He fought for the North. His name was Lew Wallace. Bear with me. Good to the last drop. In any event, Lew Wallace was a general, a successful general in the Civil War for the North, and he also wrote Ben-Hur. Very often now, when people are talking about getting two cars to a different location, and you're talking about there's only one driver available, talking about driving like Ben-Hur, because during the movie there was a point during the chariot race where he was actually guiding two chariots, he being Charlton Heston as Ben-Hur. By the way, the reason for that, I don't know the full answer to this, but Ben-Hur in Hebrew actually means son of Hur, not H-E-R, but H-U-R. Presumably that was his father's name, Hur. Can you imagine going through life like that? But anyway, also on April 10th, in 1847, there was the birth of Joseph Pulitzer. Joseph Pulitzer became, for those of you who are listening from St. Louis, you were very well aware of who Pulitzer was. Pulitzer started a newspaper, and I'm trying to remember, I don't know whether it was what is now the Post-Dispatch or the Globe Democrat, if memory serves. Those are the two newspapers in St. Louis. One of those, at least, was and may still be a Pulitzer paper. But Pulitzer was not, and of course there's a Pulitzer Prize for journalism in various categories of journalism. But Pulitzer was not born in this country. He was actually born in Hungary, which was, of course, when he was born, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Something rather interesting, the prize for journalism is named after Joseph Pulitzer. The prize for peace is the Nobel Peace Prize, is obviously named for a man named Nobel. Here's what's interesting in my mind about both of those prizes. Nobel invented dynamite, which was the basis for obviously many weapons, including a lot of bombs. And they named a Peace Prize for him. And on the other hand, they later gave it to Henry Kissinger, so irony is not lost in the more current generations. But in Pulitzer's case, he was born in Hungary, came to this country, became a newspaper guy, owned newspapers, and the Pulitzer Prize represents the very finest in journalism. Well, during the end of the 19th century, Pulitzer represented the very worst. Together with William Randolph Hearst, they engaged in a battle for circulation in a number of large American cities. We had a much smaller population in the country then, but most cities of any size could easily support two newspapers, unlike now. But Pulitzer and Hearst engaged in what was called yellow journalism, absolute sensationalism, stories that weren't true, chasing down scandals, all kinds of stuff like that. Really was the worst. And now the Pulitzer Prize is designed to reward the best in journalism every year. If they ever have a Hearst Prize, it's not clear whether it would be for journalism or the finest in kidnapping, but that's another story. Okay, in 1882, there was born the first woman who served in a cabinet of a president of the United States. Her birth was in 1882, and she was the Secretary of Labor all the way from 1933, I'm sorry, until 1945 in the Roosevelt administration, and that was Frances Perkins. She was the first woman member of a presidential cabinet, and for many years was the last. Question for you. Who was the next cabinet member who was a woman? I'll give you a hint. Like I say, it was a long time. On that date, April 10th of 1933, FDR created the Civilian Conservation Corps. The primary purpose of that was to put people to work with government money in order to help ease the pain of the Depression. The people who worked in the Civilian Conservation Corps were almost, and I believe actually totally, men. And what they did was they worked on public projects like building roads, fighting forest fires, constructing dams. The beavers went on strike, and planting trees. But they did a lot of that kind of work, which really helped soil conservation and beautifying natural habitat in this country and creating a lot of recreational areas for that. In any event, that's all we're going to cover on April 10th. By the way, today, April 12th, also something interesting occurred, today, which is somewhat historic, maybe. Hillary Clinton announced she's running for president. Well, actually, she announced she's running for the Democratic nomination for president. It was also, I believe it was yesterday, Lincoln Chafee, former governor of Rhode Island, announced that he is considering running for the Democratic nomination for the presidency to combat Hillary Clinton. Lincoln Chafee has as much chance of winning the Democratic nomination as I do. Okay. Let's go to April the 11th. On April 11th, 1932, Joel Grey was born. Joel Grey is an interesting guy for a lot of reasons. More recently, he became somewhat interesting because he came out as gay, which was a major shock, except to anyone who ever watched Cabaret. Anyway, but he's also the father of someone famous and the son of someone relatively famous. You may know that he is the father of Jennifer Grey. I think that's her name, Jennifer, who was a dancer in a movie, the name of which escapes me. I want to say Dirty Dancing. And I've been told by our producer extraordinaire, the lovely Alicia, that I'm right, that that Jennifer Grey was in Dirty Dancing, and she even did some of the dancing in that film. Believe it or not, some of her dancing was dubbed. But she was in that. I'm sure she's done other things since then, but I'm not that familiar with current culture. That's why we do This Week in History instead of This Week in Popular Culture. But she was in that. Joel Grey's father was famous only within a limited sphere, I think. He was Mickey Katz. And if you don't know who Mickey Katz was, you can look him up. But he was an entertainer in what used to be called the Borscht Belt. And he did a lot of comedy that was basically related to a Jewish audience. But he made record albums that sold in at least the hundreds of thousands. And lots of people's grandparents are more familiar with that than even their parents are. But that was Joel Grey, or maybe great-grandparents. That was Joel Grey's father. And April 11th, 1932 was his date of birth. Also on April 11th, Ugandan leader Idi Amin fled the Ugandan capital in 1979 as troops of other African nations began to close in. Idi Amin was a horrible dictator and killed lots and lots of people, and he left the capital, which was Kampala, and still is. And a couple of days after that, his government fell, and it was a while, and I don't know what the current state of the government in Uganda is, except my recollection of what I remember reading is it's not very good. But in any event, it's undoubtedly better than it was under Idi Amin. And on April 11th, but in 1983, the film Gandhi opened. 1983, that movie was 22 years ago. That's hard to believe, but that starred Ben Kingsley, among others, as Mahatma Gandhi. And it was Mahatma Gandhi, as most people know, who inspired Martin Luther King, Jr., and the people who followed him in the civil rights movement. And the film Gandhi came out then. It later won 8 Oscars, and the film was made in the United Kingdom and was directed by Richard Attenborough. In 1961, on April 11th, something else happened. We were talking about a Jewish theme with Mickey Katz and Joel Grey. The Eichmann trial opened in 1961 on April 11th. He had been hiding in Argentina after the war ended. He had survived the war. He had lived well beyond the Nuremberg trials. He wasn't tried there. And he had escaped to Argentina. He was caught by the Israeli Secret Service, and he was brought to trial in Israel for war crimes committed during World War II. He was the architect of what was called the final solution. He was the one who designed the way in which Jews would be eliminated from the earth. It worked great, but actually it obviously did a lot of damage. And Eichmann was found in Argentina and kidnapped, essentially, by the Israeli Secret Service, brought to Israel, tried there, and ultimately hanged. His hanging was in May of '62, the following year. And also, one other thing, in 1970 on that date, that was yesterday's date at the time that we are taping, April 11th, 1970, Paul McCartney announced something with regard to the Beatles. And what he announced was that the Beatles were breaking up. That was April 11th, 1970, and I know somebody who undoubtedly cried massive tears that day, a cousin of mine who is still into the Beatles. Okay, April 12th, which is the day on which we're doing this, but going back to 1945. I mentioned April 12th was the day on which somebody became president who had never been voted for that office. That man was Harry Truman. And in a minute I'm going to ask you, and in fact I'll ask you now, I'll answer you in a minute. Harry S. Truman was his name. Oh. And what did the S stand for? We'll come back. But he became president on this date in 1945, though never having been voted for that office, because Franklin Roosevelt died. Being vice president, of course, Truman became president and did not have a vice president from that date until he won his own election and was inaugurated in 1949. But it was Alvin Barkley, if I recall correctly. But Truman had no vice president for that entire period, demonstrating how important that office is. We managed for all those years without one. It's not the only time. But since Truman served the bulk of Roosevelt's last term, and without a vice president, it suggested that the office, at least as conducted then, wasn't totally necessary. But Truman became president on Roosevelt's death. Roosevelt died in Warm Springs, Georgia, of a cerebral hemorrhage on April 12, 1945. And the question of Harry Truman's middle initial, what did it stand for? Nothing. It was just an S. Why his parents did that, I have no idea. I once knew somebody who said of himself that he never had a middle name because his parents couldn't afford one. But in Truman's case, that may not be the case, but S was just S. The same thing, by the way, is true of Grant, although he made something up. Ulysses S. Grant, same letter. When he was born, Ulysses S. Grant was on his birth certificate, but he never had a middle name, but he made up one, which was Simpson. Ulysses Simpson Grant. They named, of course, a cartoon after him. It was called The Family Guy. I'm kidding, yes. Okay. On April 12th, 1844, something happened which was of significance for the United States and for Texas. The then Secretary of State, John C. Calhoun, who would play an important part in history almost 20 years later, but he was Secretary of State then, and he signed an annexation treaty with people from what was then the Republic of Texas. Texas was its independent nation. And that treaty was designed to bring Texas, which included a far bigger territory than it does now, into the U.S. As it turned out, the Senate rejected the treaty, but Texas became a state a year later after all that. But Calhoun was Secretary of State. Why did he figure in history later? He was a senator in later years in 1860 and 61, and I believe it was from North Carolina. And he was among those who really fomented the southern states to withdraw from the Union, and which thus began the Civil War. And Calhoun, the state from which Calhoun came, which again I think was North Carolina, was the first state to secede from the United States. So there. And also on April 12th, Yuri, watch this, Alexeyevich Gagarin made the first successful manned space flight. But here's something interesting. We had a space flight after that, which was made by Alan Shepard. Alan Shepard was the first American in space, but he wasn't the first American in orbit. That was John Glenn. Shepard got up into space, but didn't orbit the Earth. Glenn did. But Gagarin, in 1961, did both. He obviously, in order to get into orbit, you have to go into space, unless you're Alice Cramden. But in any event, or Timothy Leary, I suppose. But Gagarin went into space and into orbit, both. The United States trod more carefully with its astronauts and separated those two. And on April 12, 1955, it was the successful field tests were announced of the Salk vaccine. This was just a couple of days after Salk announced the vaccine. We talked about that a moment ago. But they had conducted successful field tests. And the reason this was of interest in connection with Roosevelt's death is because, by the way, speaking of visuals, I just noticed my ears moving while I was talking. And so I'm going to be quiet for one moment and show you something. You may want to gather the kids around your device where you're watching this to show them this. Are you ready? Here we go. Okay, enough of that. Anyway, so Roosevelt, of course, had polio, and the Salk vaccine helped prevent it. And clearly it was not available when Roosevelt contracted polio. In fact, it's kind of odd for an adult to get polio. It was often referred to colloquially as infantile paralysis. But Roosevelt did get it. They don't really know why. They believe he was in some contaminated water. But when you catch something like that, you clearly never know really what caused it. Just want to talk about a couple things on April 13th, and then we'll get to the end part of our program. But I want to invite you again, before we talk about April 13th, to get involved in the program. Oh, and there's something else you can do for me. If you're watching this program, and even if you're only moderately enjoying it, we're going to get better. So if you would, down below where you're seeing this on YouTube, I'm pointing in that general direction, down. Okay. There is a thing you can hit, a note you can hit, which says subscribe. Okay, if you wouldn't mind, please hit that, click on that, because what will happen as a result is when we do our next video, after you click on subscribe, you're going to be notified when it's uploaded, so that you can then, as I said, be notified and then go to YouTube and see the next video. And in connection with that, you can do us one other favor, and that is, if you don't like the show, you can email us, and I'll give you the email address again, or you can email us if you do like it. But if you do like the show, instead of telling us, although that would be welcome, please tell a friend. We would love to have more people watch the show and comment on it, and you can help us do that by going ahead and doing that. And also in future weeks, we're going to have some interviews. So it's worth your while to subscribe, because you're going to hear something vastly more interesting than just having me talk. We're going to have some conversations with some authors and some other folks, a doctor as well. So again, down there, down by the, I can't do this, it's backwards. Down by the, there it is, down there, see? It says subscribe. Go ahead and click on that, and that would be most appreciated. And again, bushmanbooks.blogspot.com is a way to take a look at some of the stuff we've written in the past. And finally, again, tjbradio@gmail.com is a way to drop us a note and let us know if there's something you want to say about the show. The simple two-word expression, "you suck," is not really terribly helpful. But anything else you'd like to write, please feel free. Okay, April 13th was the first win by Tiger Woods of a major golf tournament. Now, that's not going to be terribly interesting to a lot of people, but because they don't follow sports or don't like Tiger Woods, whatever. But that was on April the 13th, 1997, in Augusta, Georgia. They're playing, I think that was the Masters, wasn't it? Yes, that was the Masters tournament. And I think, though I'm not certain, but it makes sense because it's the same date, I believe they're playing that now, and there's some other 21-year-old kid who is ripping up the course. I frankly don't follow golf, but there you are. Interesting number of birthdays, particular types of people being born, not particular types, but a particular plethora of later famous people born on the date of April 13th. Garry Kasparov, who was a Soviet chess champion during the days of the Soviet Union, was born on April 13th, 1963. And in 1909, which, by the way, was the year of the first Lincoln penny, there was an American writer born by the name of Eudora Welty. I want to tell you something interesting about Eudora Welty in a minute, but she wrote, among other things, Death of a Traveling Salesman, which is better than the other title that she was going to use, which was going to be The Travels of a Dead Salesman, The Ponder Heart, and The Robber Bridegroom. Those are three of the books. She wrote many more. Of Eudora Welty. One of the interesting things is prior to more modern email programs, there was an email program that was used by many people that was named and came in a free version and a version that cost money. But from the people who used it, I never did, they say that even current email programs don't nearly compare to the program called Eudora. I don't know if you can still get it, but Eudora was initially a shareware program, and you could pay for it and get an even better program, supposedly. But anyway, it was named after Eudora Welty, and she was born on April 13th, 1909. In 1906, Samuel Beckett was born. He was an Irish poet and playwright, and I was wrong, as it turns out, about the play that he wrote. I thought it was written by, don't ask me why, I thought it was written by Sartre. In fact, it was written by Beckett. The play was Waiting for Godot. And there must have been some similarly named project written by Jean-Paul Sartre. And as you can tell, I don't speak French. But that's what I remembered. I would have bet money that that Sartre wrote Waiting for Godot. The noise you may have just heard in the background is our assistant producer, Autumn Bushman, and she was shaking her collar because she's a Chihuahua. Also on that date, April 13th, was the birth of Thomas Jefferson, and he was our third president. He was born in 1743, and Kenocide occurs to me as a possibility. I'm just kidding. Anyway, Jefferson was born in 1743, and he served from 1801 to 1809. He was responsible for doubling the size of the country. He did that in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase. And for, you know how usually you check out something you're going to buy and then, you know, take a look at it, kick the tires, or look around the house, whatever it is, and then decide to buy it? Not old Tom. He bought it first, then he sent Lewis and Clark to look at it. They were the appraisers. They were out there trying to determine if, you know, there was a leaky ceiling in Louisiana, you know. But yeah, that was basically it. One more date, or actually two more dates, two more occurrences real quick with regard to this week. On April 14th and 15th, in different years, of course, two things happened. That is, one thing happened on April 14th, 1912, which really didn't conclude until April 15th, 1912. And one thing happened April 14th, 1865. Which didn't conclude until April 15th, 1865. Okay, what were they? Well, the 1865 you probably guessed. On April 14th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot. And on April 15th, 1865, he died. It took a day to obviously get to that point. They tried to keep him alive. They tried to save him unsuccessfully. He was shot on April 14th, and his body was shot effectively by April 15th. On April 14th, 1912, it was the Titanic. The Titanic, running at full speed through the North Atlantic, struck an iceberg, ruptured the hull, and began to sink. And on April 15th, it was sunk. It was gone. Some people, as you know, if you saw the movie, survived following the sinking of the Titanic, but that's what occurred. And speaking of dates, April 15th, which is coming up, is the deadline for your income taxes. So I want to remind you that you can file as late as midnight that night. And I'm not sure, but I believe, no, I don't think so. I was going to say last year or the year before, people in Massachusetts had an extra day because the actual tax due date came out on the 16th, and that's a state holiday, so they had until the 17th. I don't think you guys get that again. But April 15th, if you absolutely can't get your taxes ready and can't file your return, you can download a form, which you can then you can mail in. Maybe you can do it online now. You can request an extension, which doesn't extend your obligation for taxes. You need to pay taxes, and if you don't pay them until that later date, you'll pay penalties and interest. But you can file an extension to file your taxes, and you will not be penalized for filing your taxes late. That'll give you 6 months till October 15th. But by April 15th, you either have to file your tax return or a request for an extension, which, by the way, they're automatically granted. You can get a longer extension if there is good cause, but everybody who wants it gets the automatic extension. In any event, that's what's happening. Don't worry about it. That's what happens April 15th. Anyway, just the door. Okay, we're having some technical issues here. Anyway, so that's the April 15th thing. Let's talk about the... we're going to present a visual. We're going to be talking now about the wisdom of putting your religious symbol on your business card and or sign. Okay. And by the way, sorry for the interruption. The idiot who's doing the show, that would be me, forgot to turn off the sound on his telephone. So even though it's in another room, I'm guessing you heard it. And if you didn't hear it, you saw my distraction at it. So there you are. The business card, business sign issue. Should you put your religious symbol? Should you put something on there that tells people your religion? Well, it's up to you. This is America. You get a choice. You get to do what you want to do. When I say this is America, by the way, I should point out that I'm aware that some people from other countries will be watching this. Hopefully lots of other countries, but there are some. And not just Canada. There have been people watching this, not watching this video, but listening to our prior radio shows from England, Canada, and at least one other country in Western Europe. I don't remember where. But at least it is common in this country for people to put this symbol on their business cards and signs. Just a moment here. There we go. Ta-da! Okay. Now, okay. Rick, you wanted visuals. This is a visual. This one's for you. Ta-da! Okay. But in a more serious vein, which is the one that runs up to your heart, the fact is, when I see that sign, that symbol, on someone's business card or sign, I know they don't mean it well. Most of them probably don't mean it like this. But it seems to me that what they're saying is, if you don't believe as I believe, we don't want your business. You can go elsewhere. It's not quite the whites only sign that used to be prevalent in the southern part of the United States, but man, it sure seems like it. And clearly you can disagree. And I'm guessing if you disagree, you're probably Christian. But to me, what that sign says is, if you're agnostic, atheistic, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, don't come in. We don't want to do business with you. Now, let's turn that around a little bit. You will probably never in the United States see somebody put a sign on their business card or sign that shows they're Jewish, for example, or Hindu or Muslim. Imagine seeing someone's business card with a Star of David. Now, maybe they do that in Israel. I honestly don't know. But my strong guess is that you won't see that anywhere. Well, maybe within certain sections of New York you might. But other than that, you won't ever see it in the United States. Why? It's not because people who are Jewish are less proud of their religion than Christians are. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But what happens is that people who are Jewish know that there are some people who are not, who, if they know that the vendor is Jewish, won't shop there. There is still some anti-Semitism in this country. And Muslim, forget about it. If I don't know what the sign would be, but let's say, for example, you just wanted to write Allah Akbar, which is Arabic for God is great, and is a common saying within the Muslim religion. If you put that on your business card, even if you didn't, even if it wasn't obvious that you were of the Muslim faith before, it is now, and you will have some people not shop there because there's a bigotry against Muslims. Again, within certain communities, I don't remember where it is in Michigan, but there is a city in Michigan that has a very high Muslim population, at least in certain neighborhoods. There may be, but and there are places here in the Phoenix metro area where a shop will refer to the fact that their food is halal, which is in the Muslim community the same as kosher in the Jewish community. I say the same, not quite the same, but very close. It has the same general meaning, meaning they're following the dietary laws of the religion. That's different because you're catering to a specific crowd. You may have other people in the community think, well, the food is halal, therefore it's safe for me to eat, or kosher in the case of the Jewish shop. But if you're a bricklayer, a mason, other than Perry Mason, of course, a plumber, and you put a Star of David on your card, you're going to lose business in this country. You may not lose a lot of business, and it depends on your neighborhood. You put that symbol, visual time, you put that symbol on your business card, you will not lose any Christians. And among those people who profess a religion, Christians are the vast majority in this country. Now, even though this sign is normally used, visual, by Protestants, most Catholics won't hesitate to go shop there. Some will, I suppose. But all those other people I mentioned before, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, maybe some Buddhists. I hear you whispering. But all those folks, some of them will be offended. And atheists and agnostics as well. I count myself as among those who is offended. If I'm going to call a plumber, forgive me, I don't care what your religion is. Okay? If I'm going to call, If I'm going to call a computer expert, I don't care whether you believe in God or not. Really, your beliefs may not be mine, but I don't care. Now, if I'm going to call a doctor, okay, maybe. No, I'm kidding. I don't care. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what your politics are, as long as you don't impose them on me. If you start, if you're a Christian, God bless America, congratulations, great, terrific for you. I'd rather not see a gigantic cross outside your smock, all right? I'd rather not see your smock outside your clothes either, but that's another story. Anyway, I don't need to see that. If you want to do it, fine. I can make a choice. I was discussing this with a friend of mine earlier today. If you are working at Walmart and you want to hang your Star of David or your cross outside your clothing, I think it's inappropriate. I think it's offensive. But if Walmart doesn't, you're perfectly okay. You have to, if Walmart does, I'll tell you something else. If you work for me, and again, I don't care what your religion is, but if you work for me and you're wearing a religious medallion outside of your clothing, you now have two choices. Put it in your shirt or find another job. And if you think that's an abridgment of freedom of religion, you don't understand the First Amendment. And if you think that's harsh on my part, okay. But just as, by the way, if at some store they require their employees, like Hobby Lobby might, I don't think they do, but Hobby Lobby is the company that got an exemption from the Affordable Care Act because they don't believe in birth control. But even though they're a corporation, they're entitled to a religious view according to the Supreme Court of the United States. But if Hobby Lobby required all of their employees to wear a religious medallion, as long as they didn't discriminate based on which religion you espouse by your religious medallion, that's their right, I think. I don't think there's anything illegal about that. Some people might wear a zero to reflect their atheism. I don't know. I don't know if there's another symbol. But you could do that, and you'd be required to do that. I think they would be within their rights as an employer, because you don't have to work there, so long as it doesn't become widespread and it becomes impossible to get a job, if you disagree. But, again, if your employer says it's okay for you and you do it, fine. But, again, don't, if you want everybody's business, put something on there. You don't intend to be excluding, but you are. Because lots of people who have experienced religious views outside of mainstream or even not mainstream Christian belief have been told how they're wrong, how they're a member of a minority, how they're terrible if they're not a practicing Christian for some parts of their lives. And they're going to be offended. And I am too. Okay? So if you don't want my business, do what you want. But, and besides, my business may not be that important to you. But if you take the group at large of people who are offended, you're losing business. If your religious espousal is more important than your business, maybe you ought not to be in business. Maybe you ought to be, I don't know, a minister. That's okay. Your choice. Anyway, we're done for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Please remember, see me point again. I'm not pointing to a body part of mine. I'm pointing to the little tag there, the little link that says subscribe. If you'd be kind enough to subscribe to the video, you'll be notified when the next one appears, so you can avoid it. And additionally, if you wouldn't mind sharing the show with a friend, you can either give them the site on YouTube, or you can just tell them to go to youtube.com and look up Jeff Bushman Experience, and they'll find the show. And that's about it. So thanks for joining us. Hope you join us again next week. We put this out every Sunday. At least that's the current plan. And in the near term, as said, we'll be putting up some interviews as part of the program I hope you enjoyed this evening. If you care to tell us anything, the email address previously given will suffice. Thank you, and although you're leaving now, please be kind to each other, and whatever you do, though you're going away, please, 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 don't you go away mad. Good night, everybody.